Welcome to Real Time Recorded. As Dave Michaels, I'm here with Zeus. Hello, Zeus.
Hey, Dave. How's it going? Aloha still.
Aloha still.
Next week I'll be back in the mainland, but still enjoying the nice warm weather here. So,
Well,
I
you're not
understand the
missing a
entire continent is under a deep freeze. So,
yeah, you're not missing much. It's very cold here, very miserable, and not a whole lot of news. But we got a few things here in week 6 to talk about. Let's start off with Master G's announcement. Master G launched a UCaaS alignment with Cisco WebEx. And I think this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. I think that, when Cisco acquired BroadSoft, they were really going after that broad cloud piece, and broad cloud kind of got worked into what we now know as WebEx calling. But I would say Cisco kind of fumbled, maybe that's a little too harsh, but didn't really address the broad works piece, which is all these providers like Master G that still had their, what do they call it? What was the meeting app? It was called UC Express. No, what was it called? Is that right?
Yeah, well, that was one version of it. They said broad cloud.
It was UC something, but it had a client for meetings. BroadWorks had made some acquisitions and had their own video and had their own team chat capability. And I can't think of that name right now. I'm embarrassed by that. But anyway, and so these companies were kind of, going different directions. The BroadWorks camp and the Broad Cloud camp were going in different directions. And Cisco did great with Broad Cloud. That was well done, really. And but what do you do with this other network of providers? And so they fixed that now. They fixed that back at the WebEx One. They kind of announced their, the new single client and all that stuff. And now providers like Master G, who have a lot of expertise and skill around hosting UCaaS and hosting BroadWorks for that matter, now get to develop out their single app story with Master G's provided voice and Cisco cloud hosted meetings and chat. And I think that's a really nice story. It gives a local provider angle. Everyone comes out ahead. Consumers have more choices, local customized choices. Cisco gets a network of WebEx with some differentiated partners. And of course, the providers get a way to differentiate as opposed to just reselling and being a master agent, something like WebEx. So I think this is all pretty good. I'm pretty excited. I know you know Master G pretty well. What are your thoughts on this, Zeus?
Yeah, there's lots of places to buy. There's lots of ways to buy WebEx if you're a customer, right? And so the question is, why would you buy it from Master G? And I think one of the neat alignments here for Master G is the tie into their SD-WAN. If you look at SD-WAN deployments from the research I've done, I'll tell you, but 3/4 of them involve some kind of UCaaS deployment. So if you think of traditional on-prem telephony, you use the traditional WAN for that. When you move to cloud-based, cloud calling and cloud video, then of course your WAN's completely different, right? And so that favors SD-WAN. And so their ability to tie those together is pretty interesting. And now there's lots of ways to buy SD-WAN. So why would you buy it from Master G? One is they're a pretty well experienced managed service provider. And I think one of the things people don't understand about SD-WAN is it's more complicated than traditional networking. The hub and spoke model was fairly simplistic. With SD-WAN, you got to worry about where you put your security in the cloud, you put it on-prem, you do regional hub. There's a lot of things to think about, and they've got a pretty broad reach managed services. Though the biggest differentiator from Master G is their network. They don't have a traditional frame network, an ATM network where they ran MPLS on top. They built the network for the ground up to be built for real-time communications, voice and video. In fact, the first killer app they ever ran on the network was Cisco Telepresence. And Telepresence didn't really take off like everybody thought it would. And so in a lot of ways, Master G for a long time was a solution looking for a problem. And I think the problem finally came, and that's video everywhere, right? And so I think the fact that WebEx is now primarily, it's video first, they have a network built for video. I think it's a very nice alignment between the two.
It's been really interesting to watch the UCaaS space because it gets broader and broader with chat and video and telephony, but none of those things work without a network. And meanwhile, an area you cover very closely is how the network is evolving with SD-WAN. You just mentioned SASE and then all these other newer technologies, and that's kind of a different place. And so it's nice to see them coming together with Master G's initiatives here.
Yeah. Also this week, Dave, Avaya reported their numbers, and this was a good earnings call from this. This is a company,
stunning call.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is they up their guide, and they never up their guide. But if you look at the numbers, they beat pretty handily. The street was expecting somewhere between 717 and 723. They put up a number of 743 that was up 4% year over year. All the metrics that they track, One Cloud revenue was up 38 sequentially. CAPS revenue, which is their cloud alliance partner, and subscription revenue was up 34 sequentially. Software and services was 88% of revenue now, up from 86 a year before. They created about their EBITDA was 25.6% of revenue. So they've transformed this company and they've done it profitably. I think one of the more impressive numbers they put up is the big customers they had. They had 119 deals over $1 million. 14 of those were over $5 million. 6 were over $10 million, and 3 over $25 million. And it supports the thing we've said about Avaya a long time. Nobody does big as well as Avaya. And I actually talked to Jim Chirico, their CEO, the day of earnings, and I asked him, I said, Jim, you raise your guidance. You never raise guidance. And he said, why would I? He goes, I've been here 15 years and we've never made a revenue number, right? So now he does, I'll tip my hat for Jim. He has turned that ship around. And if anybody that works in a company that lives off recurring revenue, when that spiral's headed down, it's very difficult to turn around. And, when it's heading up, you can keep the momentum going pretty well. And I think they've got the ship headed in the right direction now. Obviously, they're not growing as fast as the cloud pure plays, but their customers are a lot more complicated. And I think that's one of the things, Dave, that I think has gone largely underappreciated for Avaya is it's not too hard to convert a 100-person company to cloud. They've got companies with 50,000 contact center agents, like 200,000 employees. They got big government institutions. They got big banks, right? These companies, it's hard to help those companies pivot to work from home overnight. And and Jim did talk about, you can't just have the offering. You need to have the pro services, the managed services, the SEs in the field, all those people to support this. And that's one of the reasons why Avaya does big as well as they do. So I'm curious what your thoughts were.
Well, it's really impressive what they did, because they did kind of what's the impossible. We've seen this play out not successfully. I don't know how many times over the past 10, 15 years as premises-based solutions kind of moved to a recurring model. And it's just been a very difficult transition, particularly for public companies. And so they've managed to basically go back to a lot of their base and convince them to up to the One Cloud model, which they've made pretty attractive with a lot of additional capabilities. But it's mostly a licensing model and a recurring revenue model. They just made it a much more lucrative and attractive model. So they've done a very good job of converting that installed base, which is difficult to do. And then, but it's not just that, because they also added a lot of new logos to their account. And of course, ACO, which is kind of a net new product with the Ring Central partnership, they more than doubled their seats in one quarter, which was pretty slick. Yeah. They signed deals in, they said, 12 different countries, and that's partly because Ring Central was able to expand late last year into more countries. But they're basically showing that the pipeline is filling, that the story is coming together, and they haven't made the big changes yet in the portfolio that we're expecting. And so to have done that, I mean, they've done a lot of improvements with the Spaces, for example, but their CCaaS model is mostly about a revenue, an OpEx transition, and so this is just the first foot that's dropped, is my point. And yeah. I think that the portfolio, to what you were just saying, is really coming together. They now have CPaaS. They now have their One Cloud model, which is in high gear. They have their ACL model, which is really picking up speed. Spaces, I just mentioned, they've been innovating and improving that all year pretty consistently, all last year pretty consistently. And of course, they just launched new devices. So it's really all coming together. So there should be a lot more to come after this great quarter. And along those lines of quarterly results, we also heard from Cisco. Now, Cisco's results, we're primarily interested in Cisco collaboration, and they don't break out a whole lot of information there. As a whole company, they announced that their top line was kind of flat. but that's not the sense that I have for collaboration now. So this is speculation since they don't break it out. But they gave us a few clues. They told us they called out collaboration as a high growth area for one. They identified WebEx specifically as an area of strength. They talked about the double-digit revenue growth in WebEx. They talked about the same number we heard before at WebEx One, the 600 million users. Now they say it's a quarterly average as opposed to a monthly average, so it's really holding out. And they also threw out that they connecting over 6 billion calls every month. And so sounds like collaboration unit is carrying its load pretty nicely. A lot of the stuff we had heard back at WebEx One in December, we already covered that. But they quantified it, 50 new product and feature innovations. I'm not sure if I got 50, but somewhere around there. It was a big number, that's for sure. And, they announced acquisitions, they announced new hardware. And so they're also playing a pretty long, broad game with the UCaaS, messaging, hardware, meetings, and of course, their brand new CCaaS. So I get the sense that the collaboration unit is doing well.
Well, so it depends on how you look at that, right? So they did on their earnings call. Chuck did point out that WebEx was strong, but it was offset by UC business, which is the traditional IP telephony. So that's been in decline. And when you look at their quarterly, the product breakout, it's what you would expect. The things that did well were WebEx, Meraki, security, the new Cat 9K, the new Nexus 9K. The things that were weak were things like routing, data center, and on-prem telephony, and that makes sense given people are working remotely and not in the office. Now, I thought one of the interesting points that Chuck made on Kramer's Mad Money was that he said that people are customers, and this is consistent with what I've heard, is people are getting a little bit of work from home fatigue, and people like to be able to work from home when they want to, but not be forced to work from home all the time. And I think as we start to have people come back to the office, and I do think a lot of people come back. I don't think it's going to be this mass exodus from Silicon Valley and New York and things that people have been predicting. I think that's going to drive people more into these hybrid environments where you do have to tie people at home to people in the office to people in conference rooms. And nobody does that better than Cisco, right? They've built all their stuff themselves, and they got all the new endpoints and stuff we pointed out, and all the new conference room systems. They do that better than anybody. So if the world does go to this hybrid model where you got a big mix of people from home, I think they're in a pretty good place. I think right now they're in kind of this weird spot where we're almost going back to work. I don't think IT managers are ready to pull the trigger on budgets yet, but I think it's coming.
Neither the office is reopened nor the wallet has reopened.
Yeah. But I do think there was one of the big positive things though, is I saw gross margin was almost 67%, and that's a number that's crept up. The 2 quarters before Chuck became CEO, margins had fallen below 60%. It was like 59.9 or something. And Wall Street acted like the world was falling down, right? So they've slowly gotten that back up. And so I think it's, they still run Cisco's Cisco, right? They're kind of a bellwether. They go as the market goes. And I think their number is important for us to understand just because it gives us a sense of where IT spend is overall. So
I'm just going to flag the point you made about how people are anxious to kind of go back to the office. You go back a year ago and people hated the office. Everyone was complaining about open floor plans, and companies like Google were bringing in executive chefs just to get people to stay at the office longer, and all employers provide coffee and all kinds of stuff just to get you to stay there and work there. We have fond memories of the office, but that wasn't the memories that we had if we were actually there. I mean, people were frustrated. There's no question, and they'll be frustrated going back.
Yeah, like I said, I think you're going to see a big mix, and especially for if you live in San Francisco, if you live in Manhattan, you don't have that big a place, right? So going back to the office, gets you out of your commutes like 10 steps from the bedroom to the kitchen and stuff. So I do think it'll be a mix, and I think that favors them pretty nicely. So we'll see. Zoom's done a lot of work in the meeting room space. Avaya has as well. So that's going to be an interesting battle. See who else can create that kind of end-to-end experience. So anyways, Dave, that brings us to the end of week 6, I guess. We'll be back next week with more real-time recorded.
With week 7.
With week 7, yeah.